Mike, happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, Jack. Bright and early. It's it's an interesting week because I'm a little bit slow in uploading our last video before last. So, everybody can look forward to this being there being a banner week for videos from us. But having
Hmm.
rewatched a bit of last week, I well, for one, what's your take? How's your week been? Because one thing we do shortchange is that you're working daily, figuring out things. And I know you have a new MacBook Pro, which must be fun because
Hmm.
it's a new toy for you. Any new revelations?
Well, I think there's several kind of on my desk, on my plate, so to speak, and there is also several on the in the kind of like a big, outside world of AI, vis-a-vis government regulations, vis-a-vis, governments trying to slow down the new models, the GPT 5.6, right? As we know, then there is also stuff coming from China that is almost as good as the GLX, I think, or GLS, something like that, the new model from China that is very close to the frontier models that are developed by Anthropic and OpenAI. So a lot is going on.
Well, that might be where I found some interesting opinions, and I'm gonna say because, well, how about this? I got two views. One was the most pessimistic view, and one was the most optimistic view.
Hmm.
So, as we both know, I know the, well, I'll do optimism because
Hmm.
I thought the optimism was interesting because it was a person who works for a major model, right? Who is a scientist and into the weeds, right? Like they are we're doing a talk. And by the way, maybe it's just flashbacks from COVID, but it is great that all these talks, summertime talks. I guess everybody's going to conventions because it's summertime, but they broadcast them all, so you get to see a lot of really interesting lectures, I think, right? So that's
Yeah.
fun. So these lectures, at least from him, was kind of the folly of making models, because
Hmm.
he's like that that physics, and he's a physicist. Okay, so you know my love of this. So it's like, okay, the physicist community came up with this graph, and if we were a fancy YouTube channel, I would show you the graph, but I'm not. I'm just going to pretend it's just this.
Hmm.
It's a linear model. So he said physics love linearity, right? That's what everyone loves, linearity, because it just is satisfying that you can see things progress in this way. And so what they showed is the more compute you have, the better your models, the better your model is going to get, right? So it's the classic car problem. Like you can't just keep adding horsepower to a car and it'll keep going faster, right? There's just a limit to things at a certain point. And the same thing is true of any kind of propulsion, I guess. I'm just saying propulsion, right? But this, they just said the more compute you can throw at this problem, the better it'll get. It probably has a name at this point. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but the
Okay.
name is
Well, the
escaping me.
problem in
But
the past, there wasn't enough compute. That was the whole point. Like none of these
yeah,
things work. We're at a embarrassment of riches that we just happen to have enough compute to do these things because they just didn't happen in the
yeah.
past.
The brute forcing was
Brute
difficult.
force,
Yeah, yeah.
100%. This is about and that's a good point. This is about brute force making something better through consistently huge amounts of processor time.
Yeah.
But as they have said, and this is where the pessimism comes in. It's like, well, the brute force of this is fine, but the compute has to be built, and that's straining everything. So the pessimism is going to come from the doing it part, but we'll get to there in a minute, right? But that's where all this memory and all the valuations and everything else going crazy is because compute costs money, and someone's got to pay,
Hmm.
and they're paying in a sense for something that is a little bit like, well, that's what we can talk about, right? What are you paying for? We'll see. Okay, so
Hmm.
anyway, the person who's a physicist just basically said that there's a threshold and we can go through this together because I think we remember all these, right? So they talked about the high school or the grade school level, the preschool level of generative AI
Mhm.
was not that long ago, right? It was not
Yeah.
impressive and nobody cared. Okay, let's say that happened. Let's say that happened forever. But if you were to talk about the future, you would probably talk about it being like this. You know how we are, right? Like,
Mm.
okay, things will get a little bit better over time. And then he said, okay, so we're talking about the ancient history of generative AI, which is 5 years ago, right? So we're talking about
Mm.
hardly
Yeah.
even any time at all, but yet, as with the internet, right, it was just so explosive that you just couldn't really manage it, right? But that led to Cisco systems, and you remember all that? I mean, it was funny. Like you had to build out the entire
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cost a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the kind of ancient history, is kind of interesting because, I mean, setting aside, the deficiency of the LLMs, I mean, there was a very strong group of people that saw really the fact that, this is going to scale, this is going to get more and more intelligent, right? And this is going to be really kind of like an exponential growth curve, which is that, I agree with you,
Yeah, yeah,
our, even an exponential curve at the beginning is kind of linear and it's kind of flat, right?
sure.
But then when it's kind of starts taking off, then it becomes vertical, right? And there was always this question, where are we? Are we, are we on the really beginning of that flat area, right? Or are we kind of getting towards the tilt towards the vertical? And the vertical means that, day to day or month to month, the improvements are, like enormous, right? Like, from today or to tomorrow, we double, triple, quadruple our, intelligence, and that kind of thing. So I think that at the beginning there was a realization in very small circles that we are in that flow, exponential flow of the improvement of intelligence or capabilities, right? But maybe but it will probably happen in a few years. Now it seems that nobody is even questioning the fact that we are kind of approaching the hockey stick, and going up, right? So yes, this is kind of a very uh, kind of historical time, I would say. I mean, we
Oh,
probably we don't see that. Maybe kind of like, if there was like a steam engine revolution or a printing press, like Gutenberg, maybe people didn't know how important those things were. But I think we have a little bit of a maybe kind of that kind of time right now where things are revolutionary.
well, and two, I think for both of us, being however we're positioned, like we saw that. I mean, I only saw it maybe 2.5 years ago with GPT-3, but that was what was interesting is that these models started preschool, not great, but then they sort of maybe made it up to high school. And the way this person was making his analogy was about this math test. There's a math test apparently that someone came up with that you give to math students. And they said, well, this is the test. We give the model this test. And what makes it interesting and what may be a good connection for our discussion today, and I think you'd enjoy this, which is that language is just another system that we made up. You know what I mean? Like math is interesting because we made it up, but we kind of think like it's not completely made up by us. Like we're pretty convinced that math is a pretty good model for some serious things that we didn't make up, right? Whereas language we know is entirely made up. We just came up with these words and we all agree what they kind of mean and we get by, right? So when you're talking about a large language model, or if you want to talk about ImageNet or something, that's even more interesting because it's like, oh yeah, these particular clusters of numbers just so happen to be a hot dog, and we're pretty confident that this bunch of numbers is a hot dog. And that's even more interesting from a different perspective because neither you nor I would have any difficulty. I was in the Polish deli, and I can definitely tell you hot dogs are easy to identify, right? They have all sorts of shapes and sizes, but whatever. They're all hot dogs, I guess, in the scheme of things. But we have no issues with that. That's what I'm saying, because I keep thinking now we start to butt against the real world problem, but we'll get there. Anyway, so his point was, yeah, it went very quickly to be able to pass this test. It actually passed it. In fact, what was more interesting, he said the best human, and this is another idea, right? The best human was about at 90% on this test.
Yeah.
And probably let's call it the worst human was like at 40%. So it's not an easy test, right? It's meant for that. But we can just quickly go past that and say, okay, once it passed that test, well, then it started to pass the harder test, right? So we talked early in this about the PhD level, and it's like, okay, now you're past the PhD level. So what happened is that you sort of go beyond what we even know is possible. That's what becomes interesting, I think, a little bit before we get to pessimism, right? Is that you've already surpassed the best human by now.
Yeah,
but what does that mean? That's the whole point. Like, well, so does that mean we're smarter? And it's like, well, it doesn't have any obvious. All he said is that now you can do some serious physics, but it still is sort of like a partnership because, it doesn't have any stake in the game. That's what I keep saying. It's like, it doesn't get any Nobel prizes. I guess it got one with Hassabis. Did they give the AI a prize too? Did it get to take it home and put it on its?
I don't think so.
You think somewhere, I've seen an Emmy, which, by the way, they're impressive. They're like a big statue. So when you have an Emmy, you keep it around because people are like, oh, wow, okay, you've won a major award. Great. But I guess if you're a computer, you don't care, you don't care if you've done anything, really. Well, anyway, so far so good. But he was talking quite a bit about how wonderful this is going to be for science because now some of the real hardships of science is finding enough people to care about anything to get together and talk about stuff. And I think it begins and ends with talking about stuff, right? Because mathematics is pretty good. Like you don't need the real world to do math, right? It isn't, in fact, it's just a model.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is some, I think there are some publications about unreasonable usefulness of mathematics, right? And then it kind of goes in, very quickly into the, theological discussions, religious discussions, like, hey, where is math coming from?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, so I think for some people, the fact that AI can now beat humans in the International Math Olympics level of problems,
right,
which are the craziest probably you can think of, it's kind of enough to kind of like decide, or confirm that, okay, this is, like intelligence beyond a human level. But then there's going to be other people. And then there's this kind of like, again, like scruffy versus neat. Like, how do you define intelligence? Right. So,
and that becomes very, very big because once you get past human level, what's the point is what I'm getting at. Like, we only have the LSATs to torture people with, right? Isn't that the whole point, right? Like, it's just there to keep you from having to make harder decisions, such as, are you worthy of being in Harvard or whatever people think, right?
Well, yeah, but then LSATs or LLMs, kind of being great at something.
GREs, I don't know. I didn't take any. I'm an artist, so I don't have to take tests anyway.
But you can think, hey, how about the spatial intelligence, right? How about how about emotional intelligence, right? How about the fact that the AI, being the best mathematician, probably would totally suck, as a manager, in an organization, right? Chances are that it, or maybe not, I'm wrong. But the fact is that there is different, domains of intelligence. that maybe AI is not terribly interested in as a scientific kind of discipline, because AI is kind of mostly interested in the tools that build intelligence, hoping that it will transfer to everything, right? So knowledge representation, for example, or planning, right, or all these kind of things that kind of improve algorithms, maybe automatically, recursively, autonomously, all that stuff, right? So, but then the fact remains, like, how do you test for emotional intelligence, or how do you test for spatial intelligence, or organizational, or kind of like people's, kind of relationship intelligence, all that stuff, right? So I think that there's this, but even in mathematics, right? I think that we are still, kind of maybe at the frontier, trying to invent new models, right? Because maybe there's going to be, like somebody said, that mathematics is the crazy tailor, right? It creates those models, not necessarily caring, whether there is a being that will use those clothes, that the crazy tailor created, right? Maybe it's an octopus, or maybe it's an alien, or whatever. The mathematician cares about tailoring, something new, right? Like a new model, new process, right? So chances are that maybe we will come up with something that will kind of apply immediately to fusion, right? And we will solve fusion because there is going to be now a mathematical model how things are supposed to behaving in the hot plasma, or something like that. So I think we are still looking at maybe undiscovered frontiers, which we will probably not understand, right? So this is going to be beyond, right?
Sure.
Maybe Stephen Wolfram, right, or guys like him will kind of come up, hey, oh yeah, that makes sense. But in most cases, probably, an average Joe, it's not going to be able to even grasp what the AI came up with in math or physics or chemistry.
Well, you bring up a good point, and that's always kind of where I lean, is that it's always the least interesting problems that are the best to solve. Sorry, it's the 80% problems are really worth solving, and these moonshot problems are a waste of time. All we can hope is for trickle down, and not that it matters, but I went through a little bit of research on the U.S. military that many of us feel is incredibly wasteful, right? So we have this military that spends enormous amounts of money, but if you look back, it's actually, I thought, well, some of the actual real benefits of this were sort of standardization. Like I will just tell you, my daughter recently had a medical issue where she had pain in her body, and she went online and she thought it was a UTI, and she got prescribed something over the telemedicine, like an antibiotic, right? So she started taking that. It did not have any effect. So she finally went to the doctor. The doctor examined her in some particular way, and this is a family doctor, so she's, not nobody, right? Examined her and said, you probably have a kidney infection, and I'm going to prescribe you more antibiotics. And over weeks, nothing occurred, right? It still was bad, up to the point where she was with us and just in agony, really just in agony. And we felt really bad, and we didn't know what to do. We wanted to revisit the doctor, and ultimately she went to the emergency room, which is a whole nother story. But after quite some time, they go in, and we were all kind of thinking this. It's like, it's a kidney stone, right? We all know, or at least heard stories. We all know somebody who's had it, and I hope you've never had one. I haven't. But we all know that they're one of the more insanely painful things that won't kill you. That's all I know. It's like you're in complete misery, but it's not deadly, right? So it's a complete false signal, let's call it that. And sitting there with my daughter, I went through a lot of what my father taught me, because my father was a psychologist and very into hypnosis and very into self-hypnosis, which as a subject you could just call meditation, maybe, right? Like just something where you start to try to not listen to all these signals and instead focus elsewhere. And it's effective if you can practice it a lot. It's really good, because what happened is once she found out it was a kidney stone, she was ecstatic. She was on cloud 9. She couldn't have been happier. The exact same pain, everything was still there, but her attitude changed. right?
Mm.
And therefore, everything was good. And she did get some slight treatments, and we're waiting for the stone to pass. But the whole world changed for her, and she couldn't be happier. And we had a lot of work to do. Anyway, so the story is from an AI point of view. uh, oh, we're going to cure all diseases. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, you can't even really diagnose a kidney stone that reliably. You see what I
Mm.
mean? Like the real world is outrageously sticky. And I'm also going to give a shout out to not ever listening to women's pain, which is a constant throughout the military, because in many ways the military began to understand nutrition and diet and clothing sizes and all this taxonomy around men, because people would
Mm.
come in and in fact nutrition itself was only studied because of the army, because people were so malnourished.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah, you didn't know it? Well, I'm
No,
just
I
saying,
don't.
well, the amount of spending that we see on bombs actually also goes into logistics. And that's what we
Mm.
forget, is that we are kind of good at logistics because we spend, well, what was the internet? It was a military thing. You see what I mean? Like we were so focused, hyper focused on logistics, which is probably, I don't know, 80% of war making.
Oh yeah, armies are marching.
Yeah,
Armies are
armies are
marching
not that interesting.
on their stomachs. They are not marching on their feet, right? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
saying, right?
Yeah. Well, and we talk a lot about the virtuality of it now, but I meant mainly the studies, the benefits were not from necessarily, you know, rocketry or missiles or bombs or whatever. Like I think we still have thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons that we don't do anything with them. But they need to be maintained, and staffs have to look at them and keep them from, supervillains from coming in and doing whatever they always do when they find bombs. All that kind of stuff doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
what does happen is clothing sizes and a bunch of stuff happens medically, but it didn't necessarily happen for women. That's it's a gap, right? That women's health and women's studies and women's sizes and all this other stuff didn't get the same treatment. Now we're in the 2026, so hopefully they've made up a little bit, but we already caught up with them before, right?
Mm.
um Men, we have small, medium, and large. You see what I mean? Like these were all invented by the military. That's why none of
Yeah.
our clothes fit us, right? Well, anyway, I don't know if that's that good, but my point is the problems like that are so huge
Mm.
that my point is you can't point superhuman intelligence at it, right? Because it is kind of a little bit more grassroots, right? Okay, in order to do this, you need to uh, do better studies, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand qualitative data. To my chagrin, I'm having a hard time doing so because people lie so much, or they lie consistently enough that it makes it hard to determine like meaning from qualitative data or qualitative data, but that makes quantitative data even worse, because if you collapse things to a yes or no or whatever, right, it even removes even more data. It removes more signal.
Mm.
So, a brand new world is all I'm thinking of it as, a brand new world, right? That
Yeah.
we just didn't have the ability to do it before. We never had the ability to instantly understand reams of qualitative information. And now we kind of see that as being like, oh yeah, in fact, we have to
Mm.
keep people from doing it. We have to keep people from doing all of their work on LLMs, because you're right. If you're a math Olympiad and this machine can beat you with almost no effort whatsoever, seemingly,
Mm. Yeah.
why put in the time, but that's humans. I guess, like, we're still always going to have spelling bees, even though they became ridiculously hard and only a few people can do them because people like doing stuff like that, right? But they're not useful, I guess, is the problem. That
Yeah.
talent, that skill isn't applicable anymore. And that's what
Yeah.
this physicist was saying. He's like, well, that's what makes it hard now. Is like, well, what do you need to do to be a physicist other than, kind of my track, which is, well, you just have to study everything and then you'll be a better physicist, right? That's
Yeah.
the
It's kind of like being a chess player, right? I mean, it's kind of intellectually extremely challenging, but applicability,
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, he did say that once the models got better than humans, which they've been at forever, people actually got better at chess because now they could see things that they couldn't do before. So human players are apparently better at chess. Maybe human players are better at Go. It's just they're
Mm,
not ever as good as the machine. But you're
yeah.
right. It's like the people who win are the fastest runner thing. You know that phenomenon of like no one has ever gotten to this until somebody does, and then everybody does. It's that, and not that we need to change the topic, but Tour de France is coming up, and it's going to be brutal
Mm,
because I realized they put this course together that is like mountain after mountain, and it's like humans aren't. Even these humans are going to have a hard time with this, right? Like racing fast up mountains I can barely take, level ground. But here, racing fast up mountains is really really hard. So we're going to see. But sorry, spoiler alert for the Tour de France. It's going to be rough. They've made this very challenging course, most challenging in so many years.
yeah, yeah. I like to watch Tour de France a little bit to kind of cycling is one of the best things that you can do for your health, right? I mean, obviously not Tour de France level cycling, but a little bit of riding a bike to the lake and back, right? Probably a very good thing.
Bikes are fun, but this kind of biking is no fun, and the people who do it are almost literally superhuman, as far as I can tell. Like they're human beings have to, they generate like about 1,500 watts sometimes when they're pedaling. Like that's how much energy has to go into this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's and that's like you can run a few GPUs on that.
That's a great segue.
Well, so the optimistic version is they're already better than humans, right? Now, as we all can say, that it does bring into question, like, well, what do humans do? And I think maybe I'll counter to your point, which is, as always, we need to solve easy problems. That would be great, right? If and I'll still say, and I will continue to say as a designer that if this makes computers easier for the average person to use, that's a win. That's all, because computers are stupid and we should all hate them, right? But you and I are just used to them.
Mhm.
And whenever they misbehave, like the other day, my internet goes out and I keep thinking like, okay, is my internet out or is the internet out? This is a 5G internet. And so the wacky world of communication-y stuff, right? It used to be that the lines went down or who knows, right? If you don't have electricity, who knows what's wrong? But nowadays we expect, right, instantaneous understanding of any problem. And I thought, what a strange world we live in, right? We used to be like, okay, power's out for the week, time to get the candles and, we could cope. But now it seems like we have no coping capability because we're just so not used to these things being unreliable. And the last thing I think was computing, and now maybe computers will be really reliable.
Well, computers will change, but computers will become non-deterministic machines because if the large language model is the core of the kernel of your operating system, then it's going to be really interesting, to see how it works.
Well, and that's still a level of low-level problems, right? Like if you want to go in and you want to have a computer analyze your finances so that you can make better decisions. I mean, to me, it's all strategic.
Mm.
What is the point of any of this except to predict the future? And how good are we at predicting the future? It's like, I don't know, 60-40, right? It's kind of the best you're going to get.
Mm.
And 60 is great. If you're at 60, you're winning. If you're
Yeah,
at 40, you're probably losing, but you're probably not at 0 or 100, which is fusion, unfortunately, right? That's a
yeah.
100% win. is to change the laws of the universe in your favor.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's never, again, this would also be actualization, which is what I think is the pessimism.
hmm.
You want to do the pessimism now? Or do you have
Yeah.
any more optimism? You're the optimistic guy.
Yeah, I do. Although, this week was rather pessimistic in the, kind of like grand scheme of things because of the government kind of trying to regulate, stopping OpenAI from publishing their latest model. At the same time, hearing that China is kind of releasing their model that probably is not going to be allowed to be applied in the enterprise environments here because it would be very trivial for like a very advanced model to have some sort of a kind of like spyware kind of I would say predilection or propensity to installing spyware on various systems, especially if you are building something within an enterprise. So all these things are on everybody's mind, and it seems that the solution is not going to be pretty. We might be actually seeing that we might be reaching the level that is kind of the end of the run for open LLM, open AI access, right? From now on, you're gonna have to have a regulatory permission to actually use a very good LLM, right? Or you're gonna have to have a very strong, barrier from open source, vendors to, to basically, I mean, barriers to entry from those guys. So what we've got today might be actually pretty close to pretty much the limit for a while, maybe. That is the capabilities, right? I mean, we may not be able to have that kind of race where every 3 months there is like a brand new model and it's much better than the previous version. This is kind of
Yeah.
pessimistic, I guess.
Well, I think the physicist guy's like, once you get way better than humans, like, so what, right? Like, he's just saying there's no, you can't get much better because we just can't test or discern it. Isn't that the problem, right? Like, if we can't even understand it, how would we discern it's smart, it's better or smarter? It would just have to probably be, well, again, who knows, right?
Yeah.
Assessments aside, I'm a teacher. The teaching is the assessment part, right? How do you assess that someone has actually embodied any sort of learning? And to me, it's always application, right? Like, that's the whole point of learning anything, is that you're able to apply it in many different scenarios and sort of get some feeling for how this works. And shout out to how badly math teaches this in grade school and high school, that they don't really teach you why you'd need to know these things. But I saw a lovely piece about a math Fields medal winner who didn't start out liking chess. He just started out liking math. And at 3 or so, just was like really interested in how you could do these things, and sooner or later, graduated from Harvard at 17 or whatever. You know what I mean? Because it's like this thing of like, he really enjoyed it, and he loved to visualize it. That was one thing. He really liked Rubik's cubes, and he has Rubik's cubes with numbers on them, and he really liked the idea of like number theory. I guess this is all a number theorist guy, but but that's fun because it is fun. Just like any artistic, creative thing, you have to like kind of bring some life to it rather than it being the engine in the car. It's the engine that keeps things running versus the engine itself is interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but so they're already better. New models, I think, bring up the other issue of how computers are sometimes held together with duct tape. I mean, we know this for sure, that most companies have security through obscurity, or their basic data cleaning regimens are suspect or wildly different. How about that, right? Like, and nobody on earth to me is going to convince me that SAP is going to go out of business. Even though they definitely should. Oracle and SAP somehow run the entire world, and I still don't know why.
yeah. Well, the database business is pretty secure. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think the transactional, what is it, the Spectre or whatever runs the world of commerce is hard to hack. But I'd say password, anything where it's that world, right? Of like my router, I had to restart and I did some stuff even though it was actually the tower was down and they finally told me the tower is down or something like that. So it was this thing of like, once it all went back up again, all of my computers forgot that was the computer because I think the MAC address changed, which again, why would anyone know any of these things? Why do we know these things, Jack? Is because they bit us in the ass at one point and
yeah,
nothing worked because it was a stupid MAC address problem, and it's that manual, right? Like, oh, you don't get the manual. You just have to figure these things out, right?
yeah,
You have to dig deeply into these subsystems to see that it's all a bunch of read-write messages. And sooner or later, can a computer go in and exploit those? Why wouldn't it be? I mean, isn't that what's always the case? It's all a house of cards, I think. But I don't know
yeah.
that their concern is as usual. This is about, hey, your bridge is falling down. Don't start blaming the builders of the bridge. Fix the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this is kind of relevant, but what we are talking about is kind of like a fundamental change to everything. So your problem with the router, right? I mean, I have several similar issues, on my network, and I started interacting with my LLM about it. And oh man, I mean, I made enormous progress, probably, in minutes to kind of fix, like the addressing exactly the same thing, right? And so if you start applying all these things to other domains, then I guess it's a positive thing, right? I mean, the complexity of technology is going to keep going up, right? The additions of AI to pretty much everything is going to make it, like on several levels. So first, the AI can now apply to itself, right? So the models, I think, Anthropic, just released a paper or something that said that about 80% or 90% of the new model that they are building is actually based on the older AI improving itself, right?
Right. And this
So,
is recursion of some sort. And that's
yeah.
fine, right? That's how recursion works.
Yeah, so the recursion is going to get to 100% probably with maybe some maybe input from humans, right? So then it's just going to be the electricity bill, to kind of prevent us from having newer and newer AI. But then they're going to start optimizing maybe for cost and for energy and stuff like that. So chances are that we will have a runaway situation with everything, right? We will have runaway situation with runaway train, right? Like AI, but then all the subsystems around it, all the harnesses, all the, maybe, thermostats, and the refrigerators going to have follow that runaway because that AI component is going to be in a runaway situation. Although I think, personally that the best car has already been manufactured, so the next generation cars is just going to be a nightmare to drive and operate. But that's kind of like a side topic maybe.
It might be good for next. I did see what I thought was really interesting is that when you have an electric car, you don't need all the aspects of cars anymore. Like you don't need transmissions. They have this kind of funny planetary gear thing that was really cool because it's just really
Yeah.
cool because you don't need to think of it the same way. And that would be great if this is saying like, hey, we're from the age and maybe remember the Saturn V rocket? It's
Yeah.
like we don't need this powerful thing anymore, which is kind of cool. But in the day, it's like, no, we needed the most enormous rocket conceivable, right,
Mm,
to
mm,
do this thing, and then we like found cheaper ways to do it. So I think it'll still curve, hopefully, and so we'll do the pessimism. The pessimism is the massive ripoff of everybody by everybody else, right? That everybody is somehow investing $5 billion into a company, so they'll buy 5 billion of their product,
Mm.
which somehow turns into $10 billion. And the accounting trick part does get a little concerning, but what else is new, right? This is the, selling shares of the Brooklyn Bridge or of mine or something like that, right? It's this thing of the infinite amount of money that people will generate based on outrageous greed, but it doesn't pay off, right? The oil fields run dry, or, whatever reality sets in, which is that you don't need more than superhuman, perhaps, for doing little scheduling tricks, or maybe, as we were trying to say, is like, what the hell's wrong with my doctors or my daughter's doctor who didn't think of seeing if it was a kidney stone? You see what I mean? Like, it's the laziness, the shortcuts, the inattention to detail. Well, what if AIs could do those, right? The niceties. I'm sure right now, maybe it's a bad example, but remember how everyone asks you your opinion about stuff?
Mm.
Well, that's something we invented, or like, I mean, I kind of invented it because it's a triggered activity, right? It was this idea of things are triggered by other things. And I used to design them and write them and try to understand what was influencing people to participate, right? So I'm asking for your attention, but I have to figure out how to get it from you. And that was also a big part of my class. I just asked them, hey, how was this week? Good, bad, terrible, whatever, or good, okay, bad, and open text box. And what I wanted to see is, like, with that little amount, what can I use? What predictors can I achieve?
Mm.
But what I learned was people lie, and not maybe even lie. It's, you could just call it, like, they don't tell the truth. How's that? Like, they don't complain. So when you're going to see your doctor, you don't complain. And I kept saying, well, you should go to she had an appointment that day, even though she'd been in the ER all night. She had an appointment, and I was like, well, you could just go there to yell at her.
Mm. Well, I think that this could be like an interesting data set that actually you might have at your disposal, because what you've got is you have two sets of evaluations that are different, right? You have
Yes.
anonymous evaluations, and then you have the kind of like daily, kind of weekly, kind of in class kind of
Right.
data, right? So there could be, right? I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but there could be, if the data set was maybe large enough, maybe it's not enough, but there could be a latent representation in those open evaluations that might actually point you to the features that exist in the anonymous evaluations. So chances are that, human brain, if it is not, if it is, let's be nice, right? If it is fibbing, right? A human brain, if it's fibbing, maybe it's creating like those underlying patterns that can be captured through a model if it is trained on the real point of, on the real data set, right, which was the anonymous, right? It would be really interesting to see if you can kind of model that and then cross-validate to see if it actually is able to catch up that, okay, this guy who loved your class actually didn't like it, but he said, hey, my guy, really, really love your class, right? And the pattern was that he said, like, or he or she said, like, really, really, right? Which is a kind of like an underlying brain pattern that kind of means actually the opposite, right? Or something, whatever it was in the anonymous data set. So it would be interesting to actually analyze it this way.
Well, thank you. And I still look for any, I'm hopefully maybe getting some help, because I do feel like you said, it's interesting, but I don't know that I completely have the right take on it. It's like any, maybe it's like a real science, right? I have the data, I just don't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? That's always the problem is, it's better
Like,
than having an idea and not having any data. But now
so
I have it.
so in the Dune world, the emperor had the Bene Gesserit truth teller, right? That is
Mm.
able to. So maybe you can generate an AI model that is going to be your personal Bene Gesserit truth telling system that is going to be able to spot these kind of things.
Well, I mean, I've always had that vision, right? That was the point, is that you getting feedback from, let's say you were running a project, which you are, let's say you had employees, which people have. Let's say, you know what I mean? In any world that we live in with other people, we're often spending a lot of time doing things that I think are in my data, which is reacting to things that aren't worth reacting to. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard one, right? False signal and outliers are really big problems when you have big goals.
Yeah.
And secondly, the actions from those tend to also disturb the system enough so that other things don't happen. So
Yeah,
basically,
like in the quantum world, an observation is distorting the system.
exactly right. You are not understanding the system by observing it. But if you could have this LLM observe things, that was my hope. Like, it can, if you get it right, it can turn this into a story, and the story can then be given some weight. You know what I mean? And I think a good example, it's always politics, right? But like you just said, you're going to ask all these people their opinion about something, and they're going to have strong opinions because that's the way you measure it. And what will be interesting is, does that actually motivate them to vote? And that correlation is obviously not one-to-one. The angry people may never vote, as we all know, right? That's the thing. But that strong signal is going to influence things, and this has been a political thing probably forever, right? Which is the undue influence of non-actors. And I keep thinking about a world where, like, haven't done it either, but I wanted the GitHub comment section to now be able to build a story about how is this project going. And maybe it's moot now because humans aren't needed anymore to do GitHub summaries, But the question would be narrative, because well, we're out of time, but I am always going to say that LLMs don't understand time, and time is critical to strategy and critical pretty much to all of being in the real world, right? Because without any knowledge of temporality, nothing makes any sense. You see what I mean? Like, hey, people sleep for 8 hours a day, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Or whatever. Let's hope they do. People need food. I don't know. There's just, while you can have a fact be articulated, its actuality is extremely complicated. Well, yeah, you need food. Oh, by the way, do you want to know what stumps the most advanced superhuman model? Okay, the question that stumps it is that a man and his son are in a man and his mother are in an accident, and the mother dies, and the son is rushed to the hospital, where the surgeon, in encountering the son, and the surgeon, who is a man, is in parentheses, encounters the son and says, I can't operate on this person, it's my son. And the question is, how is this possible? And the LLM will say, it's because he's the mother.
Really? Interesting.
Yes. And the reason why this happens is maybe too interesting, but you know why this happens is because the trope, the memory, the joke is so entwined in our culture that everyone does this joke, because the joke is it's a mother, but we assume it's a male. And that's why it puzzles us, because we see the surgeon as somehow always being male. And that's just a thing in our heads. There's nothing, right? But the joke goes that way. But because it's subverted, the LLM literally can't understand it for what it is.
Yeah.
Because it's like us. We get ideas in our heads that are completely untrue, but we will never say that we won't question them because why would we, right? There's this idea that we are all operating on sort of an operating system, I guess, and that it gets fixed in time and place, and you just don't want to change it because somebody's going to have to point it out to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think I think that the question, kind of like, so the quality question, like, hey, here we have a logical problem or a temporal problem here, and that is kind of intertwined. How do you handle that? And there's an increasing kind of like work in the quote unquote AI harnesses that are
Mm-hmm.
actually creating like the representations of what we are looking at with maybe other models, smaller models, so that statement, that natural language statement that you use to describe the problem, the accident, the surgeon, and everything, is actually re-represented into a much more stronger, much more kind of logical or knowledge style, where you are able to remove a lot of fuzziness or possible inconsistencies, and kind of present that now to the model for a final verdict, right? So yeah, I mean, chances are that even if we don't have the privilege or the luxury of kind of getting like a hugely improved model every several months, then that work in the harnesses or agentic platforms is going to maybe make up the difference. So yeah, that's kind of,
Well, and maybe
it's
I
interesting.
contribute because I'm in the same boat. I'm trying to figure out how to structure this so that
Mm.
any situation with qualitative info, and it's a translation. I mean, this is another thing that we keep forgetting, right? We can all agree we just made up language. There's nothing about it. It's just something we made up, and we all agree, kind of, unless it's important, and then we disagree about it, about what is.
Mm.
That's our thing, right? We just do that. And let's say, one of the fun things is if you travel to another place where, yeah, it's a different place. Like they have a different language and they have a whole different way of representing things. And you always want that translator. And I'm always curious about that role, right? Like here's a person who can think in different subsets, but as we know from LLMs, it's like you're just saying, okay, this thing is a mango, and we call it a tokta, or whatever. Like it's the same space in our brains. We just keep them in the same space. But those people also can do this translation, in a certain creative way, because there's some things that aren't translatable, right? Relationships and roles, and the fact that we know a lot about men's sizes, but we don't really know about women's sizes. And we have these blind spots that never get addressed sometimes. But now we've got this tool maybe that could help us translate, right? We need to translate some needs that maybe just had never been worth. They'd never been worth it before. But I guess I'm
Yeah,
going to say, the pessimism, if I didn't get it all out, was again just the business aspect of this is the pessimism that they're going to ruin everything pretty much, as they always do. But then it tends to, do its thing, right? Like you overdo it, and then it collapses, and then it comes to some, it comes to some
yeah, it
whatever.
may very well be, right? I mean, as all the great businesses, the railroad business, right, the
Yeah,
steel business,
totally crushed. Yeah.
it was totally brutal kind of situations pretty much everywhere you look at this. The crude oil, the Rockefeller stuff, right? I mean, it was enormously brutal business practices and business models and everything else you can think of, right? So maybe we will get there. The problem might be that this is such a huge deal that maybe it's bigger than crude oil, maybe it's bigger than the railroad. Hopefully, I'm wrong, but yeah.
Well, the need for massive amounts of energy never seems to get old. How's that, right? Like, that's our brute force. How about that? We'll just end it on we just like to brute force things,
Mm,
and then sooner or later we get clever, hopefully, right? Fingers
yeah.
crossed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brute,
brute,
brute force in business, and an interesting discussion.
brute force in business, if you can get away with it,
Yeah,
it's effective, but it isn't clever,
yeah. I guess so. I mean, there is like a great movie, right? The Enron story, right? What was the title? The
The
smartest man in the
smartest
bit,
people in the
yeah,
room.
yeah, in the room, right? That was such a blueprint of what you are talking about. The brute forcing stuff. Yeah,
So we'll see. If these companies at the moment, we know they're brute forcing everything anyway, whatever, right? Like that's their model right now, is to have dominance through brute force and getting us all hooked on it, which I just start to realize it's like um yeah. Well, next week we'll talk more about what is happening on our desktops, because boy, these are some interesting hooks that they have. I just deleted 10 gig of Claude data the other day that was hiding on my disk somewhere, and I kept thinking of, like, what in the world is this for, right? Like, why are you, once we'll see if the Hive computing Hive thing becomes true, because LLMs talking to LLMs,
yeah.
that's a
That
thing.
that would be the super consciousness,
uh,
emerging.
Next week.
Yeah, next week. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Always fun. Cheers, Jack.